The year was 1992, and America was ready for change. George Bush had been president for 4 years, and people were tired of the same old politics. The economy wasn't doing well, and voters wanted someone fresh, someone different. That's when Bill Clinton stepped onto the national stage. Bill wasn't your typical presidential candidate. He came from Arkansas, a small southern state that most Americans couldn't even find on a map. He grew up poor, raised by his grandmother after his father died in a car accident before he was born. His mother worked as a nurse, struggling to make ends meet. But Bill was smart, really smart, and he had something special that people noticed right away. He could talk to anyone and make them feel like they mattered. When Bill announced he was running for president, nobody took him seriously at first. He was just a governor from Arkansas, competing against big names and established politicians. But Bill had a secret weapon, his wife Hillary. She wasn't like other political wives who smiled quietly and baked cookies. Hillary was a lawyer, a strong woman who spoke her mind and had her own ideas about how the country should be run. The campaign trail was rough. Stories came out about Bill's personal life, rumors that could have ended his political career before it really began. But Hillary stood by him, appearing on television to defend her husband and their marriage. She showed America that she was a fighter, someone who wouldn't back down when things got tough. Together, they made a powerful team. When Election Day came, something amazing happened. Bill Clinton won, becoming the youngest president in decades. But this wasn't just about Bill, it was about both of them. For the first time in American history, people talked about getting two for the price of one. Hillary wasn't going to be a traditional first lady who hosted tea parties and picked out White House china. She was going to be involved in real policy, making real decisions that affected real people. The early days in the White House were like a breath of fresh air. Bill was young, energetic, and full of ideas. He played the saxophone on late-night television and jogged around Washington in his shorts. He seemed more like a regular person than the stiff politicians America was used to. Hillary, meanwhile, was breaking barriers left and right. She set up an office in the West Wing, the first time a First Lady had ever done that. She led the charge on healthcare reform, something that had never been attempted on such a scale. The economy started to improve almost immediately. Jobs were being created, the stock market was going up, and people felt optimistic about the future. Bill had a way of connecting with ordinary Americans that other politicians just couldn't match. When he said, "I feel your pain," people believed him because it seemed genuine. He would spend hours talking to regular folks, listening to their problems and promising to help. Hillary was busy too, traveling around the world and meeting with foreign leaders. She spoke about women's rights and human rights, making it clear that America cared about more than just business deals and military power. She was tough in negotiations and wasn't afraid to speak up when she saw injustice. Many people saw her as the real power behind the throne, the one making the important decisions while Bill charmed everyone with his personality. The Clinton White House was different from anything America had seen before. It was young, diverse, and full of energy. Staff members worked long hours but also knew how to have fun. There were movie nights, birthday parties, and casual gatherings that made the White House feel more like a home than a stuffy government building. Bill and Hillary seemed to genuinely enjoy being there, and their enthusiasm was contagious. As the years went by, their popularity only grew. The economy kept getting better, unemployment went down, and America was at peace with most of the world. Bill's approval ratings soared, and Hillary became one of the most admired women in the country. Political experts started talking about the Clinton brand, how they had created something special that could last for decades. Some even whispered that after Bill's 8 years were up, Hillary might run for president herself. But underneath all the success, there were warning signs that few people noticed at the time. Investigations were starting. Questions were being asked about old business deals back in Arkansas. The Whitewater Land Development Project that the Clintons had invested in years earlier was attracting attention from reporters and prosecutors. It seemed like small stuff compared to their big successes, but it was the beginning of something that would follow them for years. There were also whispers about Bill's behavior with women. Stories would surface then disappear, then surface again. Hillary always defended him, sometimes attacking the women who made accusations. She called them part of a vast right-wing conspiracy trying to destroy her husband. Most Americans believed her, or at least they wanted to believe her because they liked what the Clintons were doing for the country. The Clinton Foundation was started during this time, meant to do good work around the world on issues like healthcare and education. It seemed like a natural extension of their public service, a way to help people even after they left politics. Nobody could have predicted how controversial this foundation would become later, or how it would be used against them by their enemies. Hillary's role in the White House kept growing. She wasn't just giving advice behind closed doors. She was making public speeches, meeting with world leaders, and leading major policy initiatives. Some people loved this, seeing it as progress for women everywhere. Others were uncomfortable with the idea of an unelected First Lady having so much power. These critics would grow louder over time, especially when some of Hillary's projects didn't work out as planned. The healthcare reform effort that Hillary led was supposed to be their biggest achievement, but it turned into their first major failure. The plan was too complicated and they didn't do a good job of explaining it to the American people. Republicans attacked it fiercely, and even some Democrats were skeptical. When it finally died in Congress, it was a huge embarrassment for both Clintons, but especially for Hillary. Despite this setback, they bounced back quickly. Bill focused on other issues where he could get things done, and Hillary took on smaller, less controversial projects. They learned how to navigate Washington politics better, making deals with Republicans when necessary and always keeping their eyes on the bigger picture. Their partnership was their greatest strength. When one of them stumbled, the other was there to help them get back up. By the mid-1990s, the Clintons seemed unstoppable. They had survived every attack, overcome every obstacle, and built a political machine that looked like it could dominate American politics for years to come. They had money, influence, and most importantly, they had each other. The idea of a Clinton dynasty wasn't just a dream anymore. It was starting to look like reality. But as they would soon learn, success in politics can be fragile. One scandal, one mistake, one moment of poor judgment can change everything. And for the Clintons, that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. The foundation they had built looked solid from the outside, but there were cracks forming that would eventually bring it all crashing down. The morning of January 20th, 2001 was bittersweet for the Clintons. After 8 years in the White House, they were packing up their belongings and saying goodbye to the place they had called home. Bill's presidency was over, and George W. Bush was taking the oath of office. But this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. Hillary had already made history by becoming the first former First Lady to run for the Senate. While Bill was finishing his second term, she was campaigning across New York State, shaking hands with voters who had never met her before. It wasn't easy at first. Many New Yorkers saw her as an outsider, someone who had moved to their state just to launch her political career. They called her a carpetbagger, someone who didn't really understand their problems or care about their communities. But Hillary was determined to prove them wrong. She visited every corner of New York, from the wealthy neighborhoods of Manhattan to the struggling Rust Belt cities in the western part of the state. She listened to farmers talk about their challenges, sat with factory workers who had lost their jobs, and met with small business owners trying to make ends meet. Slowly but surely, she started to win people over. Her Senate campaign was really about more than just New York. Everyone knew this was practice for something bigger. Hillary had always been ambitious, and after 8 years of watching her husband be president, she wanted her own chance to lead. But she was smart enough to know that she needed to prove herself first. She needed to show that she could win elections on her own, that she could be more than just Bill Clinton's wife. When Hillary won her Senate seat, it felt like validation for everything she had worked toward. She wasn't just riding on her husband's coattails anymore. She was a politician in her own right. The victory party that night was emotional. Bill was there, beaming with pride. But this was Hillary's moment. She had done something that no other First Lady had ever done, and she had done it her way. Meanwhile, Bill was figuring out what to do with the rest of his life. Most former presidents fade into the background, writing their memoirs and giving occasional speeches. But Bill was only 54 years old when he left office, too young and too energetic to just retire. He decided to stay involved in public life, but in a different way. The Clinton Foundation became his main focus, a way to use his fame and connections to help solve problems around the world. The foundation started small, working on issues like healthcare in developing countries and education for poor children. Bill threw himself into this work with the same passion he had brought to politics. He traveled constantly, meeting with world leaders, business executives, and activists. He was building a different kind of power base, one based on relationships and good works rather than votes and elections. Hillary, meanwhile, was learning how to be a senator. It was a big adjustment from being First Lady. Instead of setting the agenda, she was now just one of 100 senators, having to work within the system to get things done. She was careful at first, not wanting to seem too ambitious or pushy. She worked on bipartisan issues, building relationships with Republican senators who had been her husband's enemies just a few years earlier. But everyone knew that Hillary's real goal was the presidency. The question wasn't if she would run, but when. Political insiders started talking about 2008 as her year. By then, she would have served almost 2 full terms in the Senate, giving her the experience she needed to run for the top job. The Clinton political machine, which had been dormant since 2000, slowly started coming back to life. The planning for Hillary's presidential campaign began years before she officially announced. Her team started reaching out to donors, mapping out primary strategies and thinking about how to position her for the general election. They assumed it would be easy. Hillary was famous, experienced, and had the Clinton name behind her. Who could possibly beat her? Bill was involved in the planning, but he tried to stay in the background. He knew that Hillary needed to establish herself as her own person, not just as his wife running for president, but it was hard for him to step back completely. He had strong opinions about strategy and messaging, and sometimes those opinions clashed with what Hillary's advisors were telling her. The Clinton Foundation kept growing during this time, attracting bigger and bigger donations from wealthy individuals and foreign governments. Bill was proud of the work they were doing, helping millions of people around the world get access to medicine and education. But some people started asking questions about where all that money was coming from and whether it created conflicts of interest for Hillary's political career. There were also whispers about Bill's post-presidency lifestyle. He was making millions of dollars giving speeches to corporations and foreign governments. He was traveling on private jets and staying in luxury hotels. Critics said he was cashing in on his presidency, using his fame to get rich. Bill brushed off these criticisms, saying he was just trying to fund his charitable work and support his family. Hillary's time in the Senate was mostly successful. She worked hard, showed up for votes, and built a reputation as someone who could work across party lines. She served on important committees and took on issues that mattered to New Yorkers. When she ran for re-election in 2006, she won easily, proving that she had become a real New York politician, not just a celebrity passing through. But beneath the surface, there were problems building up. The Iraq War had become unpopular, and Hillary had voted to authorize it. This would later cause her big problems with liberal Democrats who opposed the war from the beginning. There were also ongoing questions about the Clinton Foundation and whether foreign donations might influence Hillary's positions on international issues. The most serious challenge, though, was one that nobody saw coming. A young senator from Illinois named Barack Obama was starting to think about running for president. He was charismatic, eloquent, and represented the kind of change that many Americans were looking for. He was also everything that Hillary wasn't. He was new to Washington, he had opposed the Iraq War, and he wasn't connected to the political battles of the 1990s. When Obama started showing up at political events and giving speeches, people took notice. He had a way of inspiring audiences that reminded older politicians of John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr. His message of hope and change resonated with voters who were tired of the same old political fights. Most importantly, he wasn't afraid to take on Hillary Clinton. The Clintons initially didn't take Obama seriously. They thought he was too inexperienced, too new to politics to mount a real challenge. Hillary's advisors assured her that her advantages in money, organization, and name recognition would be too much for any newcomer to overcome. They were confident that 2008 would be Hillary's year, the culmination of everything they had been working toward since she first ran for Senate. But politics has a way of surprising even the most experienced players. As 2007 turned into 2008, it became clear that Hillary's path to the presidency wouldn't be as smooth as everyone had expected. The Clinton dynasty that had seemed so powerful and inevitable was about to face its biggest test yet. By 2009, Hillary Clinton had achieved something remarkable. After losing the presidential primary to Barack Obama, she could have easily retreated from public life. Many politicians would have done exactly that after such a devastating defeat. But Hillary wasn't like most politicians. Instead of going home to lick her wounds, she accepted Obama's offer to become Secretary of State, one of the most important jobs in his administration. This decision surprised a lot of people. Just months earlier, Hillary and Obama had been bitter rivals, fighting each other in one of the longest and most brutal primary campaigns in American history. Now they were supposed to work together as a team. Many wondered if it could actually work, or if their past conflicts would make cooperation impossible. Hillary threw herself into the job with typical intensity. She traveled more than any Secretary of State in history, visiting 112 countries and flying nearly 1 million miles. She was trying to rebuild America's reputation around the world after 8 years of George W. Bush's presidency. Many foreign leaders had been critical of Bush's approach, especially the war in Iraq, and Hillary worked hard to convince them that America was changing direction. Her travels weren't just about diplomacy, though. They were also about building her own reputation as a serious leader on the world stage. Every trip, every meeting, every speech was a chance to show that she was more than just a former First Lady or a senator from New York. She was positioning herself as someone who understood global issues and could handle the toughest challenges facing America. While Hillary was flying around the world, Bill was busy building the Clinton Foundation into something much bigger than anyone had imagined. The foundation was raising hundreds of millions of dollars from wealthy donors, foreign governments, and major corporations. Bill was using his fame and connections to tackle problems like HIV in Africa, poverty in developing countries, and climate change everywhere. On the surface, this looked like purely charitable work. Bill would travel to places like Africa and Asia, bringing medicine to sick people and helping build schools for poor children. The media coverage was always positive, showing the former president as a humanitarian who cared about making the world a better place. But behind the scenes, things were more complicated than they appeared. The foundation was accepting money from some questionable sources. Foreign governments that had terrible human rights records were writing big checks. Corporations with business interests that might conflict with American foreign policy were major donors. Wealthy individuals who might want favors from the U.S. government were contributing millions of dollars. Most concerning of all, some of these donors had business before the State Department while Hillary was Secretary of State. When foreign governments wanted something from America, they could donate to Bill's foundation and then meet with Hillary's staff. When corporations needed permits or approvals from the U.S. government, they could sponsor Clinton Foundation events and then get access to high-level officials. Hillary's staff tried to manage these conflicts of interest, but it was almost impossible. The foundation was too big, the donors were too numerous, and the potential conflicts were everywhere. They set up systems to review donations and meetings, but these systems were often ignored or bypassed when convenient. The speaking fees that Bill was collecting made things even more complicated. He was earning between $200,000 and $750,000 for single speeches to corporations, foreign governments, and other organizations. These weren't just any organizations either. They were often the same groups that had business with Hillary's State Department or interests in American foreign policy. Hillary knew that these arrangements looked bad, but she didn't want to tell Bill to stop. The foundation was doing good work, and the speaking fees were helping to fund their lifestyle and political activities. She also believed that they could manage the conflicts and that their good intentions would protect them from criticism. But the critics were starting to pay attention. Investigative reporters began looking into the foundation's donors and Bill's speaking fees. They found patterns that seemed troubling. Foreign governments donating money around the same time they were seeking favors from the State Department. Corporations getting access to officials after making large contributions. And wealthy individuals getting special treatment after writing big checks. Hillary tried to stay focused on her job as Secretary of State, but the foundation controversies kept growing. Every few months, there would be a new story about questionable donations or suspicious meetings. Hillary's staff spent more and more time responding to these stories instead of focusing on foreign policy. The situation got worse when Hillary decided to use a private email server for her official government business. This wasn't necessarily illegal, but it was highly unusual and potentially problematic. Government officials are supposed to use official email systems so that their communications can be preserved for historical records and reviewed by Congress, when necessary. Hillary's reasons for using the private server were partly personal and partly political. She wanted to keep her personal emails private, and she also wanted to control what information might be released to the public or to her political opponents. But this decision would eventually cause her enormous problems. At first, hardly anyone knew about the private email server. Hillary conducted her business as Secretary of State, and most people assumed she was using the normal government systems like everyone else. The truth only came out later, after she had left the State Department and was preparing to run for president again. Meanwhile, other controversies were brewing. In 2012, there was a terrorist attack on the American diplomatic compound in Benghazi, Libya. 4 Americans were killed, including the ambassador. Hillary, as Secretary of State, was responsible for the security of American diplomats around the world, so she became the focus of intense criticism and investigation. Republicans in Congress launched multiple investigations into what happened in Benghazi and whether Hillary had done enough to protect American personnel. These investigations would go on for years, with Hillary testifying before Congress multiple times. The investigations didn't find evidence of criminal wrongdoing, but they kept the controversy in the news and raised questions about Hillary's judgment and competence. The Benghazi investigations also revealed the existence of Hillary's private email server. When congressional investigators asked for her emails related to the attack, they discovered that she hadn't been using the official State Department email system. This revelation opened up a whole new line of investigation and criticism. By the time Hillary left the State Department in 2013, she had accomplished a lot as Secretary of State. She had helped repair America's relationships with many allies, dealt with crises around the world, and built a strong reputation as a diplomat. But she was also carrying a lot of baggage: the foundation controversies, the Benghazi investigations, and questions about her email server. Hillary and her advisors believed that these problems would fade away once she started campaigning for president. They thought that her experience and accomplishments would overshadow the controversies. They were confident that she had learned from her mistakes in 2008 and would be a stronger candidate the second time around. But they were underestimating how much damage had already been done. The foundation controversies had created an impression that the Clintons were more interested in getting rich and powerful than in serving the public. The email server suggested that Hillary thought she was above the rules that applied to everyone else. And the Benghazi investigations, even though they didn't prove wrongdoing, had created doubts about her honesty and competence. These problems were like cracks in a foundation, small at first, but growing larger over time. And as Hillary prepared to launch her second campaign for president, those cracks were about to become much more serious. April 12, 2015 was supposed to be Hillary Clinton's moment of triumph. After months of speculation and preparation, she finally announced her second campaign for president. This time, everything was going to be different. She had learned from her mistakes in 2008, built a stronger team, and gained valuable experience as Secretary of State. The Democratic nomination seemed like it was already hers. Her campaign launch video was carefully crafted to show a new Hillary, more humble, more connected to ordinary Americans, less entitled than she had appeared 8 years earlier. She talked about fighting for families, creating opportunities for everyone, and bringing the country together. The message was clear: This wasn't the same candidate who had run in 2008. This was a Hillary who understood what Americans really wanted. Behind the scenes, her campaign was like a well-oiled machine. They had raised more money than any Democratic candidate in history. They had hired the best political strategists, data analysts, and communications experts money could buy. They had endorsements from almost every major Democratic politician and labor union leader. On paper, Hillary's campaign looked unstoppable, but there was one problem they hadn't anticipated: Bernie Sanders. The senator from Vermont was everything Hillary wasn't. He was an outsider, a revolutionary, someone who promised to shake up the entire system. He had wild hair, wore rumpled suits, and spoke with a Brooklyn accent that made him sound like someone's grandfather. Most political experts didn't take him seriously at first. Bernie's message was simple but powerful. The system was rigged against ordinary people, and Hillary Clinton was part of that rigged system. He talked about Wall Street greed, income inequality, and corporate influence in politics. He pointed out that Hillary had given speeches to big banks for hundreds of thousands of dollars. He questioned whether someone who was so connected to wealthy donors could really fight for working families. At first, Hillary's team wasn't worried about Bernie. They thought he would appeal to a small group of liberal activists, but couldn't build a broad coalition to win the nomination. They were confident that Hillary's experience, organization, and name recognition would be too much for any challenger to overcome. They had learned this lesson from Obama in 2008, or so they thought. But something unexpected started happening at Bernie's rallies. Thousands of people were showing up, especially young people who had never been excited about politics before. They weren't just attending his events. They were volunteering, donating money, and spreading his message on social media. Bernie was building a movement, not just a campaign. The contrast between Hillary's events and Bernie's rallies was striking. Hillary's events were carefully planned, with invited guests and controlled messaging. Bernie's rallies felt like rock concerts with people lined up for hours just to get inside. Young voters who should have been excited about the possibility of electing the first female president were instead flocking to the 74-year-old socialist from Vermont. Hillary tried to adjust her message to compete with Bernie's populist appeal. She started talking more about income inequality and taking on Wall Street, but it felt forced and unnatural. People could tell that these weren't the issues she was passionate about. Her real interests seemed to be in foreign policy and government management, not in the economic revolution that Bernie was promising. The email server controversy, which had been simmering in the background, suddenly exploded into a major scandal. The FBI announced they were investigating Hillary's use of a private email server while she was Secretary of State. This wasn't just a political attack from Republicans anymore. It was a real criminal investigation by the nation's top law enforcement agency. Hillary insisted that she had done nothing wrong, that using a private email server was allowed, and that she had never sent or received classified information on it. But as more details came out, her explanations became harder and harder to believe. Thousands of emails had been deleted, some of which might have contained classified information. The whole situation made Hillary look like she thought the rules didn't apply to her. The investigation dragged on for months, creating a cloud of suspicion over Hillary's campaign. Every few weeks there would be new revelations about the emails, new questions about what Hillary knew and when she knew it. Her poll numbers started to drop, and Bernie started winning primary elections that everyone thought Hillary would win easily. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, something even more unexpected was happening. Donald Trump, a reality TV star and businessman with no political experience, was running away with their nomination. Trump's campaign was chaotic and unconventional, but he had tapped into the same anti-establishment anger that was fueling Bernie's success on the Democratic side. Trump saw Hillary's weaknesses and exploited them ruthlessly. He called her crooked Hillary and talked constantly about her emails and the Clinton Foundation. He brought up old scandals from the 1990s and painted Hillary as corrupt, dishonest, and out of touch with ordinary Americans. His attacks were often crude and personal, but they seemed to stick in ways that more polite Republican criticism never had. Hillary's team thought Trump would be easy to defeat in the general election. They believed that his controversial statements and lack of experience would make him unacceptable to most voters. They were so confident about beating Trump that they sometimes seemed more worried about Bernie than about the Republican nominee. This confidence would prove to be a major mistake. The Democratic primary fight with Bernie went on much longer than Hillary's team had expected. Instead of wrapping up the nomination quickly and moving on to the general election, Hillary had to spend months defending herself against attacks from the left. Bernie's supporters accused her of being bought and paid for by Wall Street, of being a warmonger who voted for the Iraq War, and of representing everything that was wrong with American politics. These attacks from Bernie weakened Hillary for the general election. They reinforced the narrative that she was corrupt and untrustworthy. Even worse, they exposed real weaknesses in her campaign operation and her appeal to younger voters. By the time Hillary finally secured the Democratic nomination, she was damaged goods. The general election campaign against Trump was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Trump broke every rule of normal political behavior, saying things that would have ended any other candidate's career. But instead of hurting him, his controversial statements seemed to energize his supporters and dominate the news coverage. Hillary tried to run a traditional campaign, focusing on policy details and her experience. She had detailed plans for every issue, impressive endorsements from experts and world leaders, and a much more professional campaign organization than Trump. But in a year when voters wanted change and were angry at the establishment, being the more experienced and conventional candidate was actually a disadvantage. The FBI investigation into Hillary's emails came to a head just days before the election. FBI Director James Comey announced that the investigation was being reopened after new emails were discovered. Even though he later said that these emails didn't change the conclusion that Hillary shouldn't be prosecuted, the damage was done. The announcement reminded voters of all their concerns about Hillary's honesty and judgment. Election night 2016 was supposed to be Hillary's coronation. She had planned a victory party with a glass ceiling that would literally be broken to symbolize her historic achievement. Instead, she watched in horror as state after state that she was supposed to win went to Trump. The unthinkable was happening. She was losing to a candidate that almost everyone, including many Republicans, thought was unqualified to be president. The defeat was devastating not just for Hillary personally, but for the entire Clinton political operation. All of their careful planning, all of their advantages in money and organization, all of their confidence in their own political skills, none of it had been enough. The Clinton dynasty that had seemed so powerful and inevitable was crashing down in the most public and humiliating way possible. The morning after election night 2016 was one of the darkest moments in Hillary Clinton's life. She woke up in her hotel room, still wearing the purple suit she had planned to wear for her victory speech. Instead of celebrating becoming the first female president, she was facing the reality of a devastating loss to Donald Trump. Everything she had worked for over the past 30 years seemed to have crumbled in a single night. The defeat wasn't just personal, it was historic. Hillary had won the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, but lost the election because of the Electoral College. She became only the 5th candidate in American history to win more votes, but lose the presidency. The irony was painful. After all her preparation, all her experience, all her advantages, she had been defeated by a political newcomer who had broken every rule in the book. In the days following the election, Hillary disappeared from public view. She took long walks in the woods near her home in New York, trying to process what had happened. People would occasionally spot her on hiking trails, looking tired and defeated. The woman who had been one of the most powerful people in America was now just another person walking her dog in the suburbs. Bill was struggling too, but in a different way. He was angry. Angry at the FBI for reopening the email investigation, angry at the media for focusing on Hillary's scandals instead of Trump's, angry at voters who he believed had made the wrong choice. He felt like the country had rejected not just Hillary, but everything they had both worked for over their entire careers. The finger-pointing started almost immediately. Hillary's campaign staff blamed Russian interference, FBI Director James Comey's letter about the emails, and sexism among voters. Hillary herself wrote a book called What Happened, where she listed all the factors she believed contributed to her loss. But critics said she was making excuses instead of taking responsibility for her own mistakes. The Clinton Foundation, which had been such a source of pride for Bill, suddenly became a major liability. Donations dropped dramatically after Hillary lost the election. Foreign governments and corporations that had been eager to curry favor with a potential president were no longer interested in supporting the foundation. Within a few years, the foundation had to lay off dozens of employees and scale back most of its international programs. Bill's speaking fees also plummeted. The same companies and organizations that had paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars for speeches were no longer calling. His value as a speaker had been tied to his political connections and influence, and with Hillary's defeat, much of that influence was gone. The financial empire the Clintons had built was crumbling along with their political one. Hillary tried to stay relevant by writing books and giving interviews, but the public seemed to have moved on. Her book tour attracted smaller crowds than expected, and her speeches often felt more like therapy sessions than political rallies. She would talk about the election, about what went wrong, about how she felt betrayed by various people and institutions. But fewer and fewer people seemed interested in relitigating the 2016 campaign. The political world was changing rapidly, and the Clintons were being left behind. Young Democrats were embracing new leaders like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other progressive politicians who represented a completely different vision for the party. These new leaders saw the Clintons as part of the old establishment that needed to be replaced, not celebrated. Even worse for their legacy, new revelations kept coming out that made them look even more out of touch and corrupt. Investigative. Journalists discovered more details about the Clinton Foundation's questionable donors and Bill's expensive lifestyle. Stories emerged about their close relationships with wealthy donors who expected special treatment in return for their generosity. The most damaging revelation was Bill's connection to Jeffrey Epstein, a wealthy financier who was later arrested for serious crimes involving underage girls. Bill had flown on Epstein's private jet multiple times and had stayed at his properties. When these connections became public, it raised serious questions about Bill's judgment and the kind of people he associated with. Hillary tried to distance herself from these scandals, but it was impossible. After 40 years of marriage and political partnership, their reputations were intertwined. Every new revelation about Bill's behavior reflected poorly on Hillary, too, especially given her history of defending him against similar accusations. Their daughter Chelsea tried to carry on the family legacy, but she struggled to find her footing in public life. She wrote children's books, gave speeches, and made television appearances, but she never developed the political skills or charisma that had made her parents successful. When people talked about the Clinton family's future, Chelsea's name rarely came up as a serious political prospect. The Democratic Party itself was moving away from the Clinton model of politics. The centrist, business-friendly approach that had made Bill successful in the 1990s was now seen as outdated and compromised. Young Democrats wanted leaders who would fight the wealthy and powerful, not make deals with them. The Clinton way of doing politics was becoming a relic of the past. Hillary's attempts to mentor young female politicians were met with mixed results. While some appreciated her advice and support, others saw her as a cautionary tale of what not to do. Her 2016 campaign became a case study in political schools about how overconfidence and poor messaging can doom even the most qualified candidate. The Clinton political network, which had once seemed so powerful and extensive, began to fragment. Former allies moved on to support other politicians or retired from public life entirely. The donors who had funded their campaigns for decades started writing checks to new candidates with fresh ideas and untainted reputations. By 2020, when the next presidential election rolled around, Hillary was barely mentioned as a potential candidate. The Democratic primary featured a diverse field of candidates, but none of them sought Hillary's endorsement or tried to associate themselves with her legacy. It was as if 30 years of Clinton dominance in Democratic politics had been completely forgotten. Bill's health began to decline, making fewer public appearances and looking frail when he did appear. The man who had once commanded any room he entered now seemed like a shadow of his former self. His foundation work continued, but on a much smaller scale and without the global attention it had once received. The Trump presidency, ironically, made the Clintons even less relevant. Trump's chaos and controversy dominated the news cycle completely, leaving no room for former political figures to capture public attention. The 24-hour news cycle that had once amplified every Clinton move now ignored them almost entirely. As the 2020s began, it became clear that the Clinton dynasty was truly over. They had gone from being the most powerful political couple in America to being historical footnotes in less than 4 years. Their influence had evaporated, their money had dried up, and their legacy had been tarnished beyond repair. The rise and fall of the Clinton dynasty serves as a reminder that in American politics, nothing lasts forever. The same ambition and ruthlessness that had carried them to the heights of power had also planted the seeds of their destruction. They had built their careers on the belief that they were different from other politicians, that they were above the normal rules and limitations. In the end, that hubris proved to be their downfall. Today, when young people learn about American politics, the Clintons are often mentioned only in passing, as examples of how political fortunes can change. The dynasty that once seemed permanent and unshakable had collapsed completely, leaving behind only lessons about the dangers of taking power for granted in a democracy that belongs to the people, not to any one family or political machine.